Why you overthink everything. Psychology explained. You replay conversations for hours. You second-guess texts before sending them. You imagine worst-case scenarios over tiny decisions. And the strange part, your brain thinks it's helping you survive. In this video, we'll break down the real psychology behind overthinking, why intelligent people often do it the most, how anxiety traps your brain in endless loops, and the hidden habits keeping you mentally exhausted every day. By the end, you'll understand exactly why your mind won't shut off, and what actually works to stop it. Your brain thinks overthinking is protection. Overthinking feels exhausting. But here's the strange truth most people never realize. Your brain is not trying to hurt you. It's trying to protect you. At its core, overthinking is a survival response. Your mind constantly scans the world for danger, uncertainty, and potential problems because that's exactly what the human brain evolved to do. Thousands of years ago, this ability helped people stay alive. The humans who carefully analyzed threats, anticipated risks, and prepared for worst-case scenarios were more likely to survive harsh environments. The problem is that your brain cannot always tell the difference between physical danger and emotional discomfort. To your nervous system, an awkward conversation can feel like a threat. Being rejected can feel dangerous. Making a mistake at work can feel catastrophic. Not knowing what someone thinks about you can trigger intense uncertainty. So, your brain reacts the same way it would react to survival threats, by trying to predict, analyze, and control the outcome. That's why overthinking often begins after emotionally uncomfortable situations. Maybe someone sends a dry text. Maybe you embarrass yourself slightly in public. Maybe you make one small mistake during a meeting. Even after the moment is over, your brain keeps replaying it repeatedly. What did they mean by that? Did I sound stupid? What if they're upset with me? What if this becomes a bigger problem? Your brain believes that if it thinks hard enough, long enough, and carefully enough, it can prevent pain from happening again. And that's why overthinking feels productive. It creates the illusion that you're solving something. Even when you're mentally exhausted, part of you feels like you're being responsible by analyzing every angle. Your brain says, if I stay alert, I'll stay safe. But here's the psychological trap. Most overthinking does not lead to clarity. It leads to more fear, because the brain is incredibly good at generating possibilities. Once you start analyzing a situation, your mind can create endless hypothetical scenarios. One thought leads to another, then another, then another. Suddenly, a tiny issue feels enormous because your brain keeps feeding it attention. This is especially true when uncertainty is involved. Human beings naturally dislike uncertainty because uncertainty means lack of control. And when the brain feels out of control, it starts searching desperately for answers. That's why overthinkers often replay conversations, rehearse future situations, or imagine worst-case outcomes. The brain thinks preparation equals protection, but many of the situations you overthink cannot be fully controlled in the first place. You cannot completely control how people perceive you. You cannot predict every future outcome. You cannot avoid every mistake or uncomfortable emotion. Yet the brain keeps trying because certainty feels emotionally comforting. Ironically, the more you overthink, the more sensitive your brain becomes to uncertainty. Small situations begin triggering bigger emotional reactions. Tiny decisions feel high stakes. Normal social interactions become mentally draining. Over time, your brain learns a dangerous pattern. Whenever I feel uncertain, I must think more. And eventually, overthinking stops being occasional and becomes automatic. The important thing to understand is this. Overthinking is not a sign that you are broken. It is a sign that your brain has become overprotective. Your mind is trying to shield you from failure, rejection, embarrassment, and pain. But instead of protecting your peace, it traps you in constant mental noise. Real growth begins when you realize that safety does not come from analyzing everything perfectly. It comes from learning that you can handle uncertainty without needing to control every possible outcome. The anxiety loop that never ends. Overthinking and anxiety are deeply connected. In fact, overthinking is often anxiety in disguise. Most people imagine anxiety as panic attacks or obvious nervousness, but anxiety is often much quieter than that. Sometimes it looks like constantly replaying conversations in your head. Sometimes it looks like worrying about the future before anything has even happened. And sometimes it looks like mentally exhausting yourself trying to predict every possible outcome. The reason this happens is because anxiety and uncertainty activate the brain's threat system. Whenever something feels uncertain, unresolved, or emotionally uncomfortable, the brain immediately wants relief. It wants answers. It wants certainty. It wants control. And the fastest way the brain tries to regain control through thinking. So, you begin analyzing. Maybe someone's tone changed slightly during a conversation. Maybe your boss sent a short email. Maybe you made a small mistake. And now your mind starts imagining consequences that probably will never happen. At first, the thinking feels useful. Your brain convinces you that if you examine the situation carefully enough, you'll eventually feel better. So, you replay the event over and over, searching for clarity. But instead of calming anxiety, the overthinking feeds it. Because every time your brain searches for danger, it finds more things to worry about. One possibility turns into 5. 5 possibilities turn into 20. And suddenly your mind is trapped in a loop of endless what-if scenarios. Psychologists call this rumination. Rumination is repetitive thinking that circles the same fears, problems, or emotions without actually resolving them. Unlike productive problem solving, rumination doesn't move you forward. It keeps you emotionally stuck. And here's what makes the cycle so difficult to break. Overthinking temporarily reduces anxiety for a moment. When you analyze a problem, your brain feels like it's doing something. That creates a brief sense of control. Even though the thinking is stressful, it feels safer than uncertainty. So, the brain learns this pattern. Feeling anxious gives start, overthinking gives temporary relief. The problem is that the relief never lasts. Soon the uncertainty returns, and your brain responds the same way again by thinking even harder. Over time, this becomes automatic. Your mind starts treating every uncertain situation like an emergency that must be mentally solved immediately. That's why anxious people often feel mentally exhausted even when nothing physically demanding happened during the day. Their brain has been running nonstop for hours, and the more you overthink, the more hyper-aware you become of potential problems. Your mind starts scanning constantly for signs of danger, rejection, failure, or embarrassment. Even harmless situations can begin triggering stress because your brain has been trained to expect problems everywhere. This is why anxiety can feel impossible to turn off. The brain becomes addicted to searching for certainty, even though certainty is something humans can never fully achieve. No amount of thinking can guarantee that nothing bad will happen. No amount of analyzing can completely remove uncertainty from life. Yet anxious minds keep trying because uncertainty feels deeply uncomfortable. The real solution is not to think more. It's to stop treating uncertainty as something dangerous. People who break free from chronic overthinking are not people who eliminated uncertainty from their lives. They are people who learned to tolerate uncertainty without spiraling into mental loops. That shift changes everything, because peace of mind is not created by finally controlling every outcome. It's created by realizing you can handle life even when outcomes remain unknown. Why smart people often overthink more. Overthinking is often misunderstood as a lack of intelligence, but in many cases, the opposite is true. Some of the people who struggle with overthinking the most are highly intelligent, deeply self-aware, and extremely imaginative. The reason is simple. Intelligent minds are better at generating possibilities. A person with a highly active brain can quickly analyze situations from multiple angles. They notice patterns other people miss. They think ahead. They predict consequences. They mentally simulate future scenarios before making decisions. These abilities can be incredibly valuable. They help people solve problems, plan effectively, and avoid unnecessary risks. But the same mental strengths that make someone intelligent can also become the perfect fuel for overthinking. Because when your brain can imagine many possibilities, it also becomes easier to imagine many problems. Instead of seeing one possible outcome, you see 10. Instead of noticing one risk, you notice 20. Instead of making a quick decision, your mind keeps searching for the absolute best option. This creates what psychologists often call analysis paralysis. the brain becomes overwhelmed by possibilities and struggles to commit to action, because every option comes with imagined advantages, disadvantages, and future consequences. Even simple decisions can become mentally exhausting. What if I choose the wrong career? What if this relationship doesn't work out? What if there's a better opportunity later? What if I regret this decision? A highly analytical brain is constantly trying to optimize life. It wants certainty before taking action. It wants guarantees before making choices. But life rarely offers certainty, and that's where intelligent people often get trapped. They believe that if they think a little longer, research a little more, or analyze one more angle, they'll finally arrive at the perfect answer. But the search for the perfect decision often creates more anxiety instead of clarity. This happens because intelligent people are also more capable of imagining negative outcomes in vivid detail. The brain does not always distinguish between imagined threats and real threats. If you mentally rehearse failure, rejection, embarrassment, or disaster often enough, your body begins reacting emotionally as though those events are actually happening. In other words, a powerful imagination can either become a tool for creativity or a machine for anxiety. Another reason smart people overthink is because they tend to be more self-aware. They analyze their own behavior constantly. They replay conversations. They reflect on mistakes. They question their decisions and motivations. Self-awareness can lead to growth, but too much self-analysis can become mentally unhealthy. Instead of learning from experiences and moving on, the brain gets stuck reviewing the same thoughts repeatedly. Intelligent people also tend to place enormous pressure on themselves. They often fear wasted potential, failure, or making the wrong move in life. Because they understand complexity, they become more aware of how much could go wrong. Ironically, this awareness can make action harder. The smarter the brain becomes, the easier it becomes to create convincing arguments both for and against every decision. And when every option feels uncertain, the mind keeps delaying action in search of impossible certainty. But overthinking is not a sign of wisdom. At a certain point, excessive thinking stops being productive and starts becoming avoidance. The brain mistakes mental activity for progress, even when nothing is actually changing. The people who thrive are not always the ones who think the most. Often, they are the ones who know when to stop thinking and start acting. Because intelligence is not just the ability to analyze deeply, it's also the ability to recognize when analysis is no longer helping you move forward. Perfectionism is secretly fueling it. A lot of people think overthinking comes from being too emotional or too anxious. But underneath the surface, there's often another force driving it: perfectionism. Perfectionism is not just wanting to do well, it's the belief that mistakes are dangerous. When perfectionism takes over, every decision starts feeling high stakes. Every conversation feels important. Every action feels like it could permanently affect how people see you or how your future turns out. So, your brain responds by overanalyzing everything. You reread messages multiple times before sending them. You replay conversations after they end. You delay decisions because you're afraid of choosing wrong. You spend more time worrying about mistakes than actually taking action. Why? Because perfectionism convinces you that there is a perfect way to handle life. And if you think hard enough, you can find it. But that mindset quietly creates constant mental pressure. Perfectionists often believe their value depends on performance. They feel they must appear intelligent, capable, successful, attractive, or emotionally composed at all times. Even small imperfections can feel deeply uncomfortable because they threaten the image they're trying to maintain. As a result, the brain becomes hyper-alert. Before speaking, you analyze how you'll sound. Before making a decision, you imagine every possible consequence. Before trying something new, you focus on the possibility of failure. And because no decision can ever be completely perfect, the thinking never ends. This creates a painful cycle. The perfectionist brain says, if I think more, I'll avoid mistakes. But excessive thinking increases fear, hesitation, and self-doubt. Instead of feeling prepared, you feel overwhelmed. Instead of feeling confident, you feel trapped between endless possibilities. Perfectionism also creates unrealistic standards for certainty. You feel like you need to know exactly how things will turn out before taking action. You want guarantees that people won't judge you, reject you, or criticize you. You want reassurance that your choices will work perfectly, but life doesn't work that way. No relationship comes with guarantees. No career path is perfectly certain. No decision is completely risk-free. Yet perfectionists struggle to accept this reality, because uncertainty feels emotionally unsafe. That's why perfectionism often leads to procrastination. People assume procrastination comes from laziness, but many times it comes from fear. If your standards are impossibly high, starting becomes terrifying. You delay action because you're afraid your effort won't meet your expectations. And ironically, the harder you try to avoid mistakes, the more mentally exhausted you become. Perfectionism can also make people overly dependent on external validation. You begin measuring yourself through achievements, praise, or approval from others. This makes overthinking even worse, because now every interaction feels tied to your self-worth. A short reply feels personal, criticism feels devastating, failure feels like proof that you're not good enough. The brain treats imperfections like threats instead of normal human experiences. But the truth is, perfection is not what creates confidence. Confidence comes from learning that you can survive mistakes without collapsing emotionally. It comes from realizing that failure, awkwardness, rejection, and uncertainty are part of being human, not evidence that you're inadequate. Perfectionism keeps people stuck because it teaches them to fear imperfection more than stagnation. And when you fear mistakes too much, you stop fully living. The goal is not to become careless. The goal is to stop believing that your worth depends on getting everything right. Because real growth begins the moment you allow yourself to be imperfect and move forward anyway. Your brain confuses thinking with control. One of the biggest reasons people overthink is because the brain quietly develops a dangerous belief. If you think enough, you can control what happens. At first, this belief feels logical. When problems appear, thinking helps solve them. If your car breaks down, you think through solutions. If you have an important exam, you study and prepare. The brain learns that careful thought can reduce mistakes and increase success. But over time, the mind begins applying this strategy to situations that cannot be fully controlled, especially emotional and social situations. You start trying to think your way into certainty. You analyze conversations to control how people perceive you. You replay decisions to guarantee the future will work out. You imagine worst-case scenarios to prepare yourself emotionally. You mentally rehearse problems that haven't even happened yet. The brain believes all this thinking is keeping you safe. But in reality, it's often just creating the illusion of control. Because many of the things people overthink are fundamentally unpredictable. You cannot fully control how someone feels about you. You cannot guarantee success in every situation. You cannot prevent all rejection, embarrassment, disappointment, or failure. Yet the brain struggles to accept uncertainty. Psychologically, uncertainty creates discomfort because it reminds us that life is unpredictable. Human beings naturally want stability, clarity, and reassurance. We want to know that things will be okay. And when the brain doesn't have certainty, it starts searching desperately for it through endless thinking. This is why overthinking often gets worse during major life transitions, starting a new relationship, changing careers, waiting for important news, or making big decisions about the future. The brain becomes obsessed with finding the right answer because certainty feels emotionally relieving, but certainty is temporary. Life constantly changes, and the more you chase complete control, the more anxious you become. Overthinkers often believe they need confidence before they take action. They think, once I'm completely sure, then I'll move forward. But confidence rarely works that way. Most confident people are not people who eliminated uncertainty. They are people who learned how to function despite uncertainty. They understand something overthinkers struggle to accept. You cannot think your way out of every risk. At some point, action becomes necessary. And this is where the brain gets trapped. Instead of taking action, it stays inside mental loops because thinking feels safer than uncertainty. Thinking feels productive. It feels like preparation. It feels like protection. But excessive thinking often becomes avoidance disguised as responsibility. You delay decisions. You postpone opportunities. You wait for perfect clarity that never arrives. Meanwhile, life keeps moving. The irony is that overthinking often increases the very problems you're trying to avoid. Constant mental analysis creates stress, emotional exhaustion, indecision, and self-doubt. The more you try to control every outcome, the less mentally free you feel. Eventually, your brain starts treating uncertainty itself like danger, and that is exhausting. Real peace begins when you stop demanding absolute certainty from life. It begins when you accept that discomfort, unpredictability, and risk are unavoidable parts of being human. You do not need complete control to move forward. You do not need guarantees to make decisions. You do not need certainty to take action. Because the goal of life is not to control everything perfectly, it's to build the emotional strength to handle things even when life doesn't go exactly as planned. How to break the overthinking habit. Breaking the habit of overthinking does not mean shutting your brain off or forcing yourself to stop thinking. That approach usually backfires. The harder people try not to think, the more intense their thoughts become. The real solution is learning how to change your relationship with your thoughts. Overthinking becomes dangerous when every thought feels urgent, important, and emotionally threatening. Your brain starts treating uncertainty like an emergency that must be solved immediately. So, the goal is not to eliminate thinking, it's to stop reacting to every thought as if it requires your full attention. The first step is learning the difference between problem solving and rumination. Problem solving leads to action. Rumination leads to repetition. Problem solving asks, "What can I do about this?" Rumination asks, "What if this gets worse? What if I made a mistake? What if people judge me?" One moves you forward, the other keeps you trapped in circles. A helpful question to ask yourself is this thought helping me take action? Or is it just increasing my anxiety? That one question can interrupt the mental loop. Another powerful step is limiting how long you spend making decisions. Overthinkers often believe more time creates better choices, but after a certain point, extra thinking usually creates extra fear. The brain starts searching for impossible certainty. It keeps collecting more information, imagining more scenarios, and trying to eliminate all risk before acting. But no decision comes with complete guarantees. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is choose reasonably, accept uncertainty, and move forward, because action creates clarity faster than endless thinking ever will. Another important part of healing. Overthinking is learning to tolerate discomfort instead of escaping it mentally. Most overthinking is actually an attempt to avoid uncomfortable emotions. Fear, embarrassment, rejection, uncertainty, regret, or failure. The brain thinks, if I analyze this enough, I won't have to feel uncomfortable. But emotional discomfort is part of life. Avoiding it only strengthens fear. Ironically, people become mentally stronger when they stop trying to control every uncomfortable feeling. The moment you allow uncertainty to exist without panicking, the brain slowly stops treating it like danger. This is why mindfulness can be so effective for overthinkers. Mindfulness teaches you to observe thoughts without automatically believing or reacting to them. A thought is not always a fact. A fear is not always a prediction. And uncertainty is not always a threat. Sometimes your mind is simply generating noise. It also helps to reduce behaviors that feed overthinking. Constant reassurance seeking, excessive Googling, replaying conversations, and checking for validation all train the brain to stay dependent on certainty. The more you seek reassurance, the less confident your brain becomes in handling uncertainty on its own. Confidence grows differently. Confidence comes from surviving situations you once thought you couldn't handle. It comes from taking action despite fear. It comes from realizing that even when things go imperfectly, you are still capable of adapting. Most people who seem mentally calm are not people with perfect lives. They are people who stop trying to mentally control everything. And that's the deeper truth about overthinking. Peace does not come from finally solving every uncertainty in your life. Peace comes from realizing you can live fully even when uncertainty remains. Ending. Call to action. Overthinking can feel like a prison you carry inside your own mind. You wake up exhausted from thoughts that never stop. You replay conversations nobody else remembers. You imagine problems that haven't happened yet. And sometimes, Even when life is calm on the outside, your mind still feels at war with itself. But understanding the psychology behind overthinking changes everything, because once you realize your brain is not trying to destroy you, but trying to protect you, the cycle starts making sense. Your mind learned to overanalyze situations because it believes thinking equals safety. It believes worrying prevents pain. It believes certainty will finally bring peace. But peace does not come from controlling every possible outcome. No amount of overthinking can guarantee you'll never be rejected. No amount of analyzing can remove all uncertainty from life. And no amount of preparation can make you completely immune to failure, embarrassment, or disappointment. That's what makes overthinking such a trap. The brain keeps promising relief through more thinking, but the relief never truly arrives. The mind keeps moving the goalpost. Just think a little more. Just prepare a little better. Just make sure nothing goes wrong. Meanwhile, life passes by while you stay trapped inside your head. And this is why breaking the overthinking habit is not about becoming careless. It's about becoming free. Free to make decisions without needing perfect certainty. Free to take action without knowing every outcome. Free to stop treating every thought like an emergency. Because the truth is, some of the best moments in life happen when you stop overanalyzing and simply allow yourself to live. You do not need to have everything figured out before moving forward. You do not need to eliminate fear before taking action. And you do not need perfect confidence before trusting yourself. Growth happens through experience, not endless mental rehearsal. The people who eventually find peace are not the people who solved every uncertainty in life. They are the people who learned they could handle uncertainty without collapsing under it. And you can learn that too. Your thoughts are powerful, but they are not always accurate. Your fears feel real, but they are not always true. And your mind deserves rest from constantly trying to predict and control everything. So, if this video resonated with you, take a moment and ask yourself, what is one thing you've been overthinking that you need to finally let go of? Maybe it's a decision. Maybe it's a mistake from the past. Maybe it's someone else's opinion of you. Whatever it is, recognize that your life becomes smaller every time fear keeps you trapped inside your own thoughts. And if you want more videos about psychology, anxiety, habits, self-awareness, and how the mind really works, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because understanding your mind is the first step toward finally taking your life back from overthinking.